Hey everyone and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm continuing with my Spooks with Snooks series. I'm going to be telling you guys all about horror films that have been based on real life true crime cases. A lovely viewer called Sophie left a comment with this suggestion in one of my previous videos and I thought it was fantastic. I'm a massive horror film fan and it was so much fun to research for this video and find out if any of my faves had real life like true crime stories that they were actually based on, and you'd actually be surprised. Some of these are really horrific and so fascinating. Let's get straight to it. Hopefully you've heard of and watched all of these films before because they are all classics and ones that you must watch, but if not, then I really hope this has inspired you to go out and add some of these to your list. So let's get straight to it. So I'm going to start with one of my absolute favourite horror films. This film came out in 2005. It's the Amityville Horror. I remember watching it quite a lot when it first came out and it really petrified me, and knowing that it was also based on like real life and some crimes that really did happen made it even more thrilling. So this is based on a crime that happened in New York in 1974. A guy called Ronald Butch was his nickname, Defoe. He murdered all 6 members of his family whilst they were sleeping in their beds in their home in New York on 112 Ocean Avenue. This house is actually still there. It sold for like millions and millions of pounds in 2010. He shot them all with a rifle whilst they were sleeping, and he ran to a nearby bar and was like, I think my family have been murdered. Turned out he was the one that actually did it. So it was his 2 parents, and he had 3 brothers and sisters, each found again with 1 shot to their bodies. 1 year later, in 1975, a couple named George and Kathy Lutz decided to move into this home with 3 of Kathy's children. Now, they only lasted 28 days in this house before something paranormal drove them out. They were convinced of paranormal kind of activity and phenomena going on. I actually found a video of them talking, like doing a real life interview about what happened in the house. So if you're interested, I'll leave that down below. It was said that the house was definitely haunted after the horrible stuff that had happened in there beforehand. Even this itself like sounds definitely like it could be a plot of a film, and it was turned into that. So in the film, most of the facts are exactly the same. Ronald murders his whole family at home whilst they are sleeping. In the film he says it's the voices in the house that tell him to do it. And a year later the Lutz family move in and paranormal activity starts happening. Now, the 2005 remake has Ryan Reynolds in it along with Chloe Grace Moretz. She plays one of Kathy's youngest daughters who makes friends with a child in the house named Jodie, a name beginning to one of the murdered children in the Defoe family. So it's very, very similar even to the names of the families that were in the real events, and it's a scary, scary film. I remember it being quite graphic, but definitely one to watch. Number 2, you will probably all have heard of Chucky before, the creepy, scary doll. So I didn't realise this until I researched for this video, but Chucky and the Child's Play kind of film series was actually based on a real life doll, and this is very weird. I've met the doll. I went to Florida earlier this year on a family holiday. In fact, I vlogged it. And as you do, just because the Snooks family are obsessed with all things weird, we went on a ghost tour around Key West and we were taken to see the doll Robert. Let me quickly tell you about the Chucky film and then I can tell you about the real life events that inspired this film. So in the first ever Chucky film called Child's Play, a serial killer called Charles Lee Ray is running through the streets of Southside Chicago from a homicide detective who's after him after, I think, an attempted burglary. He's shot many times by the detective that's chasing him, and as he enters a toy shop and realises he's dying, he grabs a nearby doll and I don't know how but uses some like voodoo magic to put his soul into this doll, which happens to be Chucky. So the next day a woman comes and buys the doll for her son, her 6-year-old son, and then the doll goes on a murderous rampage because he's got the soul of a serial killer inside him. So this is based on the real life story of Robert the doll. Robert was a 3-foot doll. That in itself is petrifying. I'm 4'11". This doll would come up to like my hip. He was given to a 6-year-old boy called Robert Eugene Otto. Now, Robert, the young boy, gave the doll his name. So the boy became Gene, like he shortened his middle name, took on the name Gene, and he gave this doll Robert his name. The doll was apparently given to Robert by a family servant who was also very interested and practiced black magic and voodoo. Apparently she wasn't very happy with the way she was being treated in this family, and so she put a curse on the doll before giving it to Gene. Now Gene and Robert, this doll, had a very close relationship. Gene was said to be very fond and attached of him, but he did blame Robert for anything that went wrong. He kind of pointed at him and was like, Robert did it. They were said to have been seen having conversations and giggling together, and Robert's body would move and end up in different rooms and stuff like that. He was put up into the attic once Gene got married, I think, and then later a new owner found him and said that the doll was definitely haunted and gave him to this museum. Now I went to see this museum. I went to see Robert the doll. She's very excited. And it was so scary. There were so many rules that we had to listen to before we went in to see the doll, because apparently stuff is going wrong in that museum.
Number 2, ask permission for a photo of Robert. And number 3, kindly say goodbye to Robert. Come everyone.
Like whenever someone takes their phone out to take a picture of him, like electrical devices fail or crash. So whenever someone goes in to see him now, you have to ask him if you could have his permission to take a photograph. So I think in the video you can hear me being like, hi Robert, can I take a picture? Thanks. Hi Robert, thanks. It was really interesting as well. The walls of this museum were covered in letters from people that had visited Robert in the museum, and like ever since then they just had really terrible bad luck, and so they've written to him to apologise, and then their bad luck has gone. So he's definitely kind of a little bit haunted, very creepy, but he inspired the movie Chucky. It's petrifying. I'm going to put my hands up here and say I didn't have anything really bad go wrong on that day or after visiting Robert. Touch wood. So the third one I wanted to talk about was The Hills Have Eyes, and this wasn't a film that I massively enjoyed, but once finding out that it was based on a true story, I had to share it in this video because it's super interesting. So this is a film directed and produced by Wes Craven, who has produced so many incredible horror films throughout the years. I've got another one of these videos coming up soon. I'm actually freaking myself out a little bit. I keep hearing noises and I'm really getting scared. I shouldn't be making this series. I'm too much of a wimp for this. I'm actually petrified that Robert the doll is outside my door right now. Oh my god, I'm actually freaked out. Okay, Katie, calm down. Okay. But this was a film he created in 1977, and he also did a remake of his own film in 2006. This is an American horror film based on a family whose car breaks down in the middle of California on like an unbeaten dirt track that they shouldn't really be going down. They're then targeted by a group of cannibalistic mutants who end up murdering and eating them all, and that is the basic premise of the film. Now, interestingly enough, this is actually based on a group of cannibals in Scotland in the 16th century. So this is based on a guy called Alexander Sawney Bean, and he is said to be the head of a cult of 48 members who killed and ate up to 1,000 people during their time of like cannibalism, murder sprees. I did some digging into his background and he sounds very interesting. He sounds like he was a bit of a thug. He met a woman called Agnes who was also quite violent and said to have been a witch. They ran away together and ended up living in a cave undiscovered for 25 years, where they ended up having a bunch of children. They had 8 sons, 6 daughters, 18 grandsons and 14 granddaughters, and these are obviously all created through incest, which in itself is really disgusting. But this whole family group of like inbred children would go out into the evenings, rob people, capture them, bring them back and eat their bodies, up to 1,000 people. And lots of people in the town thought that wild animals were the cause of all these like deaths, but they were eventually captured, and I think he was actually executed for mass murder and cannibalism. So yeah, that is horrifying. Also, I found in the film The Hills Have Eyes, they based the cannibalistic family on mutants, and they did loads of research through film and pictures and documentations and based the kind of visuals of these mutants on the effects of nuclear fallout in Chernobyl. Chernobyl is another one of those things that I find so interesting and would love to visit one day, even though it's probably not very safe. The number 4 is, I think, one of the best horror films of all time. I remember watching it for the first time quite a few years ago and just being like, why have I not seen this before? It's absolutely incredible. It is, of course, Nightmare on Elm Street. Now, this is another Wes Craven film, and he again got the inspiration from some real life events. So if you haven't seen it already, I would really urge you to watch it. But the film is basically about 4 teenagers who are invaded and killed in their dreams. And if they're killed in their dreams, they're killed in real life. So they are all petrified to go to sleep, because in their dreams a guy called Freddy Krueger, who I'm sure you've all heard about, he's like burned and wears like a bladed glove, he comes after them, and you find out a bit more about Freddy in the film, and it's so good. So these kids are all obviously too scared to go to sleep in case Freddy comes and kills them. Now, Wes got the idea from this from 3 articles he read in the LA Times, and this was about a group of men from Southeast Asia who were fleeing from Cambodia from war and genocide. They were obviously suffering some sort of like PTSD and trauma, but they refused to sleep because of how bad their nightmares were, and once they actually fell asleep, some of them reportedly died. It said that some doctors heard the boy screaming in his sleep from a nightmare, and once he got to the boy, he was dead and there was no like nothing wrong with him. They did autopsies and they were absolutely fine. So it was almost like in the film, Freddy had killed them in their sleep. I am going to be sleeping with a lamp on tonight. Anyone else? So I'm saving the kind of, I think, most traumatic story till last. This one really gets to me because the story it's based on is so sad and so heartbreaking. The film is called The Exorcism of Emily Rose. It came out in 2005. I don't think I was a massive fan of this film actually when it first came out. Exorcisms petrify me as it is, and there are so many of them, but the fact that this is based on a true story really hits home. So in this 2005 film, we follow the 19-year-old Emily Rose, who is an American teenager. She dies of malnutrition and self-inflicted wounds after a failed exorcism attempt. The priest who performed the exorcism is put on trial and charged for her murder because no one believes that she was actually possessed, and we follow kind of the journey of the trial and how it affects the lawyers and the priest and the family of Emily Rose. This was actually based on the story, a really sad story about a young girl called Anneliese Michael. She was a German woman who was brought up in a Roman Catholic home, and at the age of 23 she passed away from severe malnutrition and pneumonia. So very similar to Emily Rose. This was after several failed exorcism attempts over the year before she passed away. So she started having seizures at quite a young age, and she was diagnosed with epileptic psychosis. She was also diagnosed with depression, and so she was treated in a psychiatric ward. By the age of 20, despite being on medication, she started hearing a lot of voices from the devil, and she also grew intolerant to religious artifacts. She avoided the crucifix, and it was said to have been harmful to her. She became really suicidal because of all of this and how she was feeling, and her family were absolutely convinced that she was possessed by the devil and by demons because she was on all this medication and it just obviously wasn't working for her. So then they turned to Roman Catholic priests to try and sort this out, and so they started performing exorcisms on her, and I couldn't really find out the details of how many they performed, but it seemed like an awful lot over the course of a year, to the point where she wasn't eating, they weren't feeding her, so she became really ill. She is said to have drunk her own urine and eaten insects and just became very demonic. So she did unfortunately pass away from severe malnutrition. You can actually see some pictures of her online and they are really heartbreaking because this poor girl obviously just had an issue with mental health but also epilepsy. This was very serious and she probably wasn't getting the right medication for it. And after she passed away, her parents and the priests involved were actually found guilty of negligent homicide, and they were all sentenced to 6 months in prison, which, if you ask me, is not long enough at all for the life of this young girl. Yeah, yeah, that's ended it on a really, really sad note, but I have enjoyed doing all the research for this video, so I really hope you found some of it interesting. Do leave me a comment down below if you've seen any of these films and what one is your favourite. I know that the Amityville, looking back, is very tacky and quite like laughable, but the fact that it was based on a true story, I mean, imagine living in a haunted house that someone has murdered their family in. It's horrible. I really hope you've enjoyed my Spooks with Snooks series so far. I love you lots, guys, and I'll see you soon. Bye!